week, anyway, just one of those weeks, I have not felt well all week. I mean, I have struggled all week. And I realized, as we were just singing these songs, why? And it's because I missed being here last Lord's Day and missed being here Wednesday night. And I feel like a new person being here with you today. I'm very thankful to be assembled with my good family here in this congregation at Rica. I had a good and pleasant visit at Plainview last week, and no criticism to them intended, but they had, I guess, somewhere around 400 in attendance, and the singing this morning exceeds the singing that I heard at Plainview. And I don't mean any disrespect to the brethren there. They're very sweet people, good people. It really is uplifting to hear the way we engage in our songs here, and it's good to be back. 1 Timothy 4:13. Till I come, give attendance to reading, to exhortation, to doctrine. These are the words of the apostle to his good preacher friend, Timothy, and therefore I believe these are words to the apostle to all that would be preachers, and our duty as ministers of the Word. You know, we're living in a time when, unfortunately, the Word of God is de-emphasized in our pulpits. And we're seeing many of my preaching brethren move away, particularly from book, chapter, and verse style preaching. It seems to be outdated. People find it old-fashioned and sometimes even a bit uncomfortable. I believe, brethren, we need more preaching from the Bible and not less.
Amen. And
certainly, I'd like to share with you this morning some text from 1 Samuel chapter 17. And when Paul said, give attendance to reading, I know from my study of church history that it was often the case that on a Lord's Day assembly like we have here today, it would be the lot of one of the elders or the local minister and evangelist, if they had one present, to stand before the congregation and simply read one of the epistles that we have in our New Testament. Sometimes they would read select passages from the Old Testament, and when they read it, they would then expound on that text. But sometimes the text itself did all the expounding that was needed, and so they would simply read the text. Paul even encouraged, as you know, the Colossians to do that, to have this letter read and the one he had written to other congregations read before them. We need to do more of that, in my opinion. We need more reading. And so, 1 Samuel chapter 17, let's just read the text together. Now the Philistines gathered their armies together to battle, and were scattered at Soko, which belongs to Judah. They encamped between Soko and Azekah in Ephaz Damim, and Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and they encamped in the valley of Elah and drew up in the battle array against the Philistines. The Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. And a champion went out from the camp of the Philistine named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head. He was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. He had bronze armor on his legs and a bronze javelin between his shoulders. Now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels, and a shield bearer went before him. So he stood and cried out to the armies of Israel and said to them, why have you come up to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine. They were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of that Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse, who had 8 sons. And the man was old, advanced in years, in the days of Saul. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had gone to follow Saul to the battle. The names of his 3 sons who went to battle were Eliab, the firstborn, next to him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest, and the 3 oldest followed Saul. But David occasionally went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. So the Philistine drew near and presented himself 40 days, morning and evening. So Jesse said to his son David, "Take now for your brothers an ephah of this dried grain and these 10 loaves, and run to your brothers at the camp, and carry these 10 cheeses to the captain of their 1,000, and see how your brothers fare, and bring back news of them." Now Saul and all they of the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. So David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with the keeper, and took the things, and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the camp as the army was going out to the fight and shouting for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had drawn up in battle array, army against army. And David left his supplies in the hand of the supply keeper, ran to the army, came and greeted his brothers. And as he talked with them, there was the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, coming up from the armies of the Philistines, and he spoke according to the same words. So David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were dreadfully afraid. So the men of Israel said, "Have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel, and it shall be that the man who kills him, the king will enrich with great riches, will give him his daughter, and give his father's house exemption from taxes in Israel." David spoke to the man who stood by him, saying, "What shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" People answered him in this manner, saying, "So shall it be done for the man who kills him." Now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was aroused against David, and he said, "Why did you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle." And David said, "What have I done now? Is there not a cause?" Then he turned from him toward another and said the same thing, and these people answered him as the first ones did. Now, when the words which David spoke were heard, they reported them to Saul, and he sent for him. David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he a man of war from his youth." And David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep his father's sheep, and when a lion or a bear came, took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it and struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. Moreover," David said, "the Lord, who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." So Saul clothed David with his armor, put a bronze helmet on his head. He also clothed him with a coat of mail. David fastened his sword to his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. And David said to Saul, I cannot walk with these, for I have not tested them." So David took them off. He took his staff in his hand, chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, put them in a shepherd's bag and a pouch which he had, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. So the Philistine came and began drawing near to David, and the man who bore the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and good-looking. The Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." David said to the Philistine, "You come with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. All this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." Now let's just pause here in our reading. I appreciate you bearing with me as we go through this text. I remember as a little boy going to Bible class. And in those days, we had flannel boards and characters that you could just stick up on the flannel board. And I don't remember who the teacher was, but this is some of my earliest memories. This is even before I would go to my mother's class. But I do remember the flannel description and illustration of David and Goliath. And as a little boy, I was impressed. I just thought, this is a really cool guy. I mean, look what he did. He brought great deliverance to Israel. Well, I'm not a little boy anymore, except in heart. But I have to say this morning, brethren, when I read this text, every time I think about this text, I am challenged deeply, as should we all be. You know, we face a number of Goliaths, giants in our time. And they come in all shapes and sizes. You know, when I think about the Goliaths and the many that we face, I think first and foremost about the religious giants that we face. The giant issues, that we face religiously. I mean, it's extremely difficult to have a simple conversation, for example, about the plan of salvation with someone. And I do this quite often with people at work. And you talk to them about the plan of salvation, and you simply quote, for example, Mark 16:16 or Acts 2:38, and people look at you funny. And as a rule, people will say, "Are you one of those that thinks baptism got something to do with salvation?" I don't know about you, but it's not just the issue of baptism itself that troubles me. It's the ability that Satan apparently has to convince so many people, so thoroughly convince them of something that's not even in the Bible. That when the Bible is quoted, people look at you cross-eyed and think you're crazy. I'm like, well, I don't know. I'm just telling you what the Bible says. This is what the Bible teaches about the plan of salvation. And yeah, that's what I believe. And yes, I believe the blood of Jesus washes us from our sins. We are facing a monumental challenge still today of overcoming the doctrine of faith only. It's everywhere. And so many have bought into it. It's like unbelievable. How are we going to... Sometimes I think we just decide, I'm not even going to bother trying anymore. Just give up. And of course, there's a perennial problem of religious division. We're trying to reach and convert an unbelieving world filled with Muslims and Buddhists and Jews and atheists and secularists. I mean, the world is full of all kinds of false religions. And as God's people, certainly we want to reach them. How will we ever successfully carry the gospel of Christ to a lost and dying world shrouded in darkness if we can't even agree among ourselves on the most basic fundamental tenets of our faith? Satan again has been greatly successful in keeping believers divided hopelessly, it would seem, among themselves. And so I think, again, sometimes we say, well, what's the point? People aren't going to listen. They're going to do their own thing. We're going to do our own thing. So just forget about it and let it go. And it's kind of like, in a way, I feel like the fighting men of Israel. We're standing on our side, looking at the other side, complaining about the other side, but never willing to go down to the valley and engage the other side. Of course, we can bring that to the cultural and social plane. The PC crowd is they threaten a lot of people. I mean, if you don't say the right thing in the right way, using the proper gender description or whatever, if you just don't word it the right way, you are a horrible human being. People will say mean, nasty things about you, won't like you, threaten you, might even throw milkshakes at you, or threaten to kill you, banging on your door, literally at night. I mean, the PC crowd is out of control. We all know that. What's troubling to me is that we have allowed the PC crowd to intimidate us into silence for the most part. I don't want to say necessarily us, but I mean, generally speaking, as the voice of God, the church in the world, what are we doing sitting silently by while the world tells us you can't preach against certain sins anymore? We're not going to allow it. And you try it, and buddy, you're going to pay a heavy price for it. And I'm saying this morning, brethren, in all due respect, bring it on. It's time we stood up and fought for the truth. Amen. This idea that we're going to let the world dictate to us what we will or will not preach against is just beyond me. We need more men in our pulpits like David, who will stand up and say, who is this uncircumcised whoever to defy the truth of God in the name of God? You know, for so long we fought the abortion issue. But I don't know about you, it still disturbs me to my core. When I think that we have a legislative body in this country that would pass legislation that would allow a woman to murder her child to the point of birth, and even after birth, to stand around and talk about should we keep it alive or not, to stand up and applaud such legislation. I shudder to think what God will do to this nation for the innocent blood that has been shed in the name of a woman's right to choose. That's offensive, by the way. When we talk about abortion, we're talking about murdering the most innocent among us. And we dress it up. And we say, well, this is a woman's right to choose. No, this is murder, plain and simple. It is brutal murder. Amen. And we're sitting around silently. What's sad is that recent polls, and I don't care for polls that much, but recent polls do suggest that more and more Americans are pro-life. The majority have pretty much always been, but especially now with, the amazing way we can look inside a woman's womb and see that baby kicking around. It's just an amazing thing. It's not human. What is it? A blob of... It's a baby! And so we see this, and the world is gradually moving more, and yet, even though the majority of us are pro-life, we dare not say anything. Preachers certainly want to stay away from this issue because it's very controversial, I don't know about you, but I would be ashamed to be afraid to speak out on this. And I would be afraid to be ashamed to speak out on this. This is a horrid evil in our land. And yet here we are countenancing it because, we can't overturn Roe v. Wade. Of course we can. And we shouldn't kowtow to Roe v. Wade to start with. As a state, we should stand up to the federal government and say, no, we're not going to murder our babies in this state. We need to have the conviction of David again. That's what we need. We stand on the sideline, afraid that if we go out and fight, it'll just be me. It's kind of like, when you're going to go to the board meeting and you've been talking to all your friends at work and everybody agrees we got to do something, we got to change whatever, and everybody's on board. Everybody agrees. We're going to go to the meeting. We're going to tell the boss whatever. And so you go to the meeting and the boss is there and you step up and you say, I got something to bring up, and you bring it up and you look around and everybody's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I think sometimes we fear that if I stand out and I speak up, if I take my slingshot and my 5 smooth stones and I and I take a stand for what's right, then it'll just be me, little old me. And if I step up, maybe 2 or 3 others will step up with me, but we are vastly outnumbered. I have to admit, the perception certainly is there that the world has gone stark raving mad. I, for one, don't believe it. I simply do not believe that a majority of people in this country think that a drag queen ought to be reading stories to our children at story time in our libraries or in our public schools. I'm sorry, I don't think we've gone that far yet. Now, there are some crazy people, yeah. There are some really perverse people, of course. I'm not denying their existence. I'm saying that the perception, and we feel like if we say something about this, we speak out against this, that we are going to be standing there all alone because the media certainly is on their side. Social media is on their side. Hollywood certainly is on their side. We can't count on our politicians to do anything but sell their soul to the devil. We all know this, and so we're like, well, if we do this, we're just going to be left out there by ourselves, flailing around. I mean, how are we going to handle this? Notice David wasn't looking at anything like that. That wasn't where David's focus was. We're afraid we might be defeated. What if I step out and I say something, and then somebody gets up and makes fun of me, and I look so totally discredited? And I just flop. I try to make a stand for the truth, but I fail in the effort. You know, I think maybe we need to be reminded about the definition of failure. Our definition of failure and God's definition of failure are often vastly different things. For example, in Acts chapter 7, one of the most profound sermons ever preached. And it's recorded, the majority at least is recorded for us in Acts chapter 7. Stephen did a masterful job going through the Old Testament to establish that Jesus is the chief cornerstone that you all have rejected. Now, I want you to think about the result of his sermon. How many of the people, as far as we know from the book of Acts, how many of those that he was preaching to said, you know, Stephen, you're right. We're wrong to oppose Jesus. We ought to become Christians today. Look, where's the baptistry? I mean, how many people respond to that? I don't know of a soul in Acts 7. In fact, they stoned him to death. One of the greatest victories the church has ever experienced came on the heels of one of the greatest sermons no one responded to other than to kill the preacher. So the way we look at it, we say, well, the preacher failed. He didn't handle that right. He should have preached a little different. He probably shouldn't have said, you know, you're resisting the Holy Ghost and your father did. That was probably too harsh. He shouldn't have said that. I mean, we could critique Stephen's sermon all day long. But the man was a champion of the faith and a martyr for Christ, and he did the right thing, and the gospel was spread as God intended it to be spread. That was a great victory. But we tend to look at things from our perspective. And we think, well, things just aren't going well because the way I see it, we're not succeeding. You know, when I think of David, and I think of the great victory that he brought to Israel, it all was the result of one boy, young man, who was willing to risk everything for the name and glory of God. And you know, as a boy, I was impressed with David. As a grown man now, I'm challenged by David. And I suppose we could be tempted on some level to say, well, maybe David was great because he was just born, destined to be great. Are some people just born to be great and the rest of us mediocre and afraid, standing, quivering in fear? Is that the takeaway from 1 Samuel 17? I don't think so. What was David's secret? It wasn't really a secret. He tells us right here in the text. What was it that propelled him to do this great thing? Well, at first, he gives his resume to Saul. You know, Saul hears about David, and he brings David in for an interview, and David's giving his resume, and he said, I was keeping my father's sheep, and a lion attacked, took it out. A bear attacked, took it out. At first, you may get the impression that David was just bragging a little bit. He's just bragging on himself. I'm a tough guy. And I've proven myself in the field of battle because I was keeping my father's sheep. And this is what I did. I took that thing by the beard and I just killed it, barehanded. Notice what David went on to say. The King James says, moreover, he said, the Lord that delivered me from the mouth of the lion and the bear will deliver me from this Philistine. In other words, David's faith was in God, period. Wasn't in himself. Wasn't in some innate greatness that he was born with. It was in recognizing and embracing God's awesome power. The battle is the Lord's. And you say, well, where did David get this great faith? Well, in this case, from experience. He gave real life experiences. This is what God did for me in the past. I mean, brethren, can we not say that we've had moments and periods in our life, we can look back on it and say, if it hadn't been for God, I would never survive that. Of course we can. But we have even more than that. We have this account. We have the account of the apostles in the New Testament. We have the whole Bible. We have the account of Christ himself. We have all of these great heroes of faith. And what have they shown us? That when we put God first and we step out in faith, that God will deliver us and his cause will advance victorious. We've seen it over and over again. We really need to ask what's happened to our faith. But it wasn't just his faith. Associated with his faith was his great zeal. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should speak about God and about God's people this way? John chapter 2. After that first recorded miracle, the Bible says that Jesus went to Jerusalem, and as he's going into the temple, he found there those that were selling and exchanging, making merchandise of the house of God. So he made a whip. And he started overturning their tables, and he's driving the animal from the house of prayer. And he stood up and he said, this is to be a house of prayer, and you've made it a den of thieves and robbers. The disciples on that occasion remembered the song. The zeal of your house has eaten me up. You ever hear the cause of Christ, the truth, the church of Christ being assailed, attacked, belittled, run down? What do you do when you hear such insults? Just sit silently by? Well, they wouldn't listen to me anyway. They just get mad. They wouldn't talk to me anymore. They'd label me a fanatic or something. And what are we doing? We're standing on the sidelines afraid to say anything. You remember what Jesus said of the Laodiceans? I would that you were hotter than you're cold. But because you're lukewarm, I'll spew you out of my mouth. In other words, you make me sick. You need to make a stand for something. Brethren, it's time we rekindle the fire in our hearts and our bosoms and once again stood up for the truth of God and his people in this world. David was a man of zeal, but he was also a man of courage. We have to, I'm not wearing it today, but one of the things I'm doing to keep insurance premiums lower, which I failed to do this last year, is I'm wearing a Fitbit. I don't like wearing stuff on my wrist. That's why I didn't wear it today. It bothered me with my long sleeve. I'll sometimes look down at my Fitbit and I'll look at my heart rate. I'm thinking, no wonder I'm tired at night. Heart rate's 120, 130. I'm just walking around, and of course it's like 300 degrees outside. I'm losing like 10 pounds a week just walking around. I'm like, man, this is not healthy. And so anyway, I'm feeling bad. I imagine this morning as I was thinking about this lesson, What if we put a Fitbit on David? I mean, he was a great hero of faith, right? He was a man full of faith and zeal. And obviously he exhibited great courage. So when he went to face Goliath, I'm sure he just calmly, nonchalantly went out there, yeah, I'll take care of this matter too. I imagine his heart was racing 90 to nothing. Adrenaline was flowing. If you'd seen his heart rate, it'd have been pretty high. Courage is not the absence of fear. When we're confronted with something, we instinctively respond in fear. We're fearful because we're not used to this, we're not comfortable with this, we don't know what's about to happen, so we kind of retreat in fear. We just stand silently in fear. And maybe in the back of our mind we're saying, well, if I just weren't afraid, I could be courageous like David. I'm telling you this morning, brethren, David and all other great men and women alike that we describe as being courageous were people who were scared to death. But they moved on in spite of their fear. They did not let their fear control them or dictate to them what they would or would not do. If it's the right thing to do, I don't care if you're afraid, do it anyway. You know what John said in Revelation 21 is appropriate? The fearful and unbelieving, the abominable, murderers, whoremongers, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burned with fire and brimstone. Revelation 21 verse 8. A couple of passing thoughts here, and the lesson will be yours. When David went to meet Goliath, Saul said what we already know: you're not qualified for this job. You're just a boy. You're just a youth. You're just a shepherd. I mean, this is not your task. This isn't your job. You're not qualified. So the preacher comes up on Sunday and he said we should go and evangelize the world. We should take a stand for the truth. And you hear that and you think, I ought to do that, I ought to do that. But I haven't been through all the classes at the Georgia School of Preaching yet. I don't have a certificate. I don't have a degree. So I'm not ready yet. I'm not qualified yet. How long are we going to attend classes on swimming before we finally decide to jump in the deep end and put to practice what we know we should be doing? You'll never learn to swim if you're standing on the bank. You got to jump in. You say, well, I'm not ready. I'm not qualified. The only way to get ready and to get qualified is to get busy and do what you know you should do. That's the only way to get ready. There's no shortcut. There's no easy way out. We have to do what has to be done. He wasn't qualified. He had shoddy equipment. I mean, a staff. Goliath, what am I? A dog? You sent the boy here to run me off with a stick? Well, he had a slingshot, some stones. Notice how Goliath would describe with all this coat of mail and this heavy armament and an armor bearer. I mean, he had all this stuff. And I'm a huge guy. I defy you. And in the name of my gods, I'm going to insult you and your God. And what are you going to do about it? Nah. I mean, and David comes out there with nothing but a few rocks. We need to remember the battle, brethren, is the Lord. And David did this in spite of personal ridicule. Notice what his older brother said. You need to go back home. He didn't say brat, but he was thinking brat. That's what he would have said if he lived in our day and time. Go home, brat. That's what he would have said. You have no business here. I know you're just here because you're naughty. You want to come watch. He did more than watch. He took the lead. You just come here to watch. So his older brother's chiding him, deriding him, making fun of him. Didn't deter David. Then he goes to the king. And what did the king say? You're just a boy. You can't do this. Can you imagine the king telling you that? At what point is David going to get the message? My older brother said, and the king now telling me, you can't do this. He did it in spite of those who doubted him, because his faith wasn't in himself. Think about the Apostle Paul for a minute. You ever read 2 Corinthians? Paul established the church at Corinth, and labored among them quite extensively, had great love for them. But there were those who came into Corinth and began to question his credentials as an apostle. They questioned his knowledge. They questioned his appearance. They questioned his speaking ability. I don't know about you, maybe you had to be a preacher to understand this, but as a public speaker, you're going to hit me on all those points. If you can't preach, at least don't be ugly. Come on, they're going to hit Paul at every turn. They're not going to leave him anything to stand on. Did it deter Paul? No. Why do we cower in fear? Why do we let an insane PC world dictate to us what we can and can't talk about, what we can and can't say, what we can and can't stand for? Why are we doing that? It's time, brethren, we stood up, once again raised the banner of the cross for a lost and dying world. Are you subject to heaven's invitation? Maybe one of the greatest Goliaths or giants that you face is your own self-doubt, your ability to hang in there if you should obey the gospel, or if you return to your first love. Will I be able to do what I say I'm going to do and continue on? I'll put it to you this way. You'll never know till you try, number one. Number two, when you give your life to the Lord will be your strongest ally. He will be there every step of the way to help you and to aid you. And outside of the Lord, there's no hope, and you are without God, Ephesians 2:12. Won't you make things right with God today? If we can assist you in any way, please don't hesitate to make that need known while together we stand as we sing.